The late summer sun beat down on the asphalt, baking the air with the humid Tennessee heat. Malik Jefferson adjusted his nondescript baseball cap, a subtle shield against recognition, and pulled the rental sedan into a spot near the back of the Soulfire Grill parking lot. He'd chosen a beige Camry, the automotive equivalent of camouflage, a stark contrast to his usual sleek black Mercedes. This was Hendersonville, a town on the outskirts of Nashville, a world away from the corporate pressures of his downtown headquarters. He was here incognito, a ghost in his own kingdom, ready to experience his restaurant not as CEO, but as a customer. His chief operating officer, Marcus, shifted beside him, a silent question in his posture. "You sure about this, Malik?" he'd asked earlier, his voice laced with the familiar mix of respect and concern. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, saw risk in every unscripted move. Malik understood the caution, yet a restless energy pulsed beneath his skin, a need to see the raw, unfiltered reality of his creation. "You stay here," Malik instructed, his voice low and firm. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but a vague unease had been simmering in his gut for weeks, a disharmony in the usual symphony of positive reports and rising profits. The Hendersonville branch, in particular, had shown a slight dip in customer satisfaction scores, a blip on the radar that had snagged his attention. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Malik cut him off, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. "I need to see this for myself." The words hung in the air, heavier than their simple meaning. "See for myself." The mantra of a leader who refuses to be insulated by layers of management and polished statistics. He needed to feel the pulse of his restaurant, taste the food, breathe the air, understand the subtle nuances that numbers couldn't capture. He opened the car door, the blast of hot air a tangible reminder of the world outside the air-conditioned bubble. "You know what?" he said, turning back to Marcus, a sudden decisiveness hardening his voice. "I'm going in by myself." The decision, once spoken, felt strangely liberating, a shedding of the CEO persona, a return to simpler times. "By myself." The words resonated in his mind as he walked towards the restaurant. It was a strange echo of his early days, when Soulfire Grill was just a dream, a flicker of passion in his heart. Back then, he'd done everything himself, from grilling the burgers to scrubbing the floors. He'd poured his soul into every detail, creating a space where everyone felt welcome, a place that celebrated the diverse flavors of his city. He pushed open the glass door, the familiar aroma of smoked meats and sizzling spices washing over him. The restaurant was moderately busy, a Thursday afternoon lull between the lunch and dinner rushes. He scanned the room, taking in the familiar decor, the warm, earthy tones, the vibrant artwork celebrating local musicians, the open kitchen where flames danced beneath the grill. He'd meticulously crafted this atmosphere, a blend of comfort and energy, a space designed to foster connection. He chose a booth near the back, a vantage point that offered a clear view of the dining area and the counter. A young waitress, her name tag read Tavon, approached with a menu, a polite smile on his face. Malik studied him, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, a subtle weariness in his eyes. It was a look he'd seen before, the look of someone carrying a burden they couldn't quite articulate. He ordered a classic Soulfire burger and a sweet tea, his mind already buzzing with observations. The music was a little too loud, the rhythm slightly off, disrupting the flow of conversation. A table near the front was littered with dirty dishes, a small detail, but a crack in the carefully constructed facade. He caught snippets of conversation, a murmur of discontent from a nearby table, a hurried apology from a harried busboy. The energy of the place felt off. Two teenage boys, slouched in a booth across from him, caught his attention. Their voices, though low, carried a distinct edge. "I don't get it," one of them muttered, picking at his fries. "This place used to be so much better." "Yeah," the other agreed, his voice laced with teenage disdain. "Now it's all different." Malik's senses sharpened. Different. The word hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken meaning. He leaned back in his booth, pretending to study the menu, but his focus was entirely on the boys' conversation. "It's like they're trying too hard," the first boy continued, gesturing vaguely around the room. "All this inclusive stuff." "Yeah, and the music sucks," the other chimed in, oblivious to the irony of their own exclusionary remarks. Malik's jaw tightened. He recognized the undercurrent of their complaint. It was a sentiment he'd encountered before, a resistance to the changing demographics of the city, a yearning for a past that never truly existed. He made a conscious decision to make Soulfire Grill a welcoming space for everyone, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. He'd updated the menu, added vegetarian and vegan options, and fostered a culture of acceptance amongst his staff. Clearly, not everyone was happy with the changes. He watched as Erica Russell, the new store manager, approached the boys' table. She was a young woman, barely in her 30s, with a tight smile and a carefully composed demeanor. Malik had handpicked her for this position, impressed by her energy and her commitment to his vision. But now, seeing her in action, he detected a fragility beneath the surface, a strain in her movements, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. He knew the pressure she was under, the weight of expectations, the challenge of balancing corporate mandates with the realities of managing a diverse team. He listened intently as Erica addressed the boys' complaints, her voice smooth and professional, yet lacking the genuine warmth that had always been a hallmark of Soulfire Grill. He watched her retreat back to the kitchen, her shoulders slumped, her face etched with fatigue. Something was wrong, and he intended to find out what it was. The aroma of sizzling Cajun spices and caramelized onions hung heavy in the air, a familiar comfort to Malik. He'd built Soulfire Grill on this scent, on the promise of a taste of home, no matter where home happened to be. He stood in line, consciously trying to blend in, his plain gray sweatshirt and worn jeans a far cry from his usual tailored suits. He'd even grown a beard, a scratchy, uneven thing that itched incessantly. He'd wanted to experience his restaurant as a regular customer, unburdened by the weight of ownership. The Hendersonville branch was one of their newer locations, and today, a Thursday afternoon lull, seemed like the perfect opportunity for an anonymous inspection. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze sweeping over the dining area. Families chattered over plates piled high with jambalaya. Couples shared hushed conversations and booths bathed in the warm glow of pendant lights. And a lone businessman hunched over a laptop, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his keyboard a steady counterpoint to the low hum of conversation. So far, so good. This was the vision of vibrant tapestry of life, woven together by the common thread of good food and community. He noted the easy camaraderie between the staff, the way they moved with an almost choreographed efficiency, clearing tables, refilling drinks, and offering a genuine smile to each customer. Erica Russell, the new manager, flitted through the room, a whirlwind of controlled energy, her sharp eyes missing nothing. He felt a flicker of satisfaction. He'd handpicked Erica, impressed by her passion and drive during the interview. She'd seemed to embody the Soulfire spirit. He just hoped he wasn't wrong. The rhythmic clanging of the kitchen, the sizzle of meat on the grill, the murmured conversations, it all blended into a symphony of familiar sounds that eased the tension in his shoulders. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Maybe this incognito visit wouldn't be so bad after all. A sudden surge of teenage energy rippled through the line behind him. Two boys, barely old enough to shave, jostled each other playfully, their laughter echoing a little too loudly in the otherwise peaceful atmosphere. Malik, lost in his observations, hadn't noticed them approach. He subtly adjusted his stance, creating a little more distance between himself and the boisterous duo. He'd always been acutely aware of his own presence, the invisible barrier that often seemed to form between him and his employees when he visited his restaurants in his official capacity. He wanted to be invisible today. He needed to be. Dude, ever since they brought in that new manager, this place is weird. The words, spoken in a low, conspiratorial tone, snagged his attention. Malik's internal smile faded, replaced by a tightening in his chest. He casually glanced back, feigning disinterest, his mind already racing, dissecting the seemingly innocuous statement. Would it be weird? He prided himself on creating an inclusive environment. I know, right? The other boy chimed in, his voice laced with a dismissive sneer. They're always hiring people who don't even smile at us. It's like reverse racism or something. A cold dread washed over Malik. Reverse racism? That was absurd. But the casualness with which the words were spoken, the underlying tone of entitlement, sent a chill down his spine. It was the kind of casual prejudice that festered beneath the surface, often unnoticed, until it erupted into something far more toxic. He fought the urge to turn around, to confront the boys. He had to remind himself of his purpose here. He wasn't Malik Jefferson, CEO. He was just another customer, another observer. He needed to understand. He needed to listen. He took a deep breath, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Had he misread the atmosphere? Had he been so focused on the surface-level pleasantries that he'd missed the underlying currents of discontent? He'd always believed that Soulfire was a place of welcome for everyone, regardless of race, religion, or background. Was that belief misplaced? The line inched forward, bringing him closer to the ordering counter. He studied Erica as she interacted with customers, a forced smile plastered on her face. Her movements were still efficient, but the earlier lightness had vanished, replaced by a strained, almost robotic quality. Fatigue etched lines around her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with a weariness that hadn't been there before. His initial satisfaction curdled into a nagging unease. The boys' comments, though seemingly isolated, resonated with Erica's visible exhaustion. There was something more here, something simmering beneath the surface of polite smiles and efficient service. He couldn't ignore it. He had to know what was going on. His incognito visit had just taken an unexpected and decidedly unpleasant turn. The pleasant aroma of spices suddenly felt cloying, the hum of conversation now a cacophony of whispers and veiled meanings. He was no longer an observer. He was a participant, caught in a web of unspoken tensions and hidden biases. His gut twisted with a premonition that the Soulfire he thought he knew was about to reveal a far more complex and potentially troubling reality. The lingering scent of hickory smoke, a signature of Soulfire Grill, usually comforted Malik. Today, it felt heavy, almost cloying. The boy's words, carelessly tossed into the air like discarded napkins, echoed in his mind. They're practically giving the food away to well, you know. He'd recognized the unspoken code, the subtle prejudice veiled in casual teenage banter. Malik, disguised in a simple baseball cap and jeans, shifted his weight, the discomfort settling deeper than the worn leather of his booth. He'd come to this Hendersonville branch incognito, wanting to experience his own creation through the eyes of an average customer. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of satisfied diners, the rhythm of efficient service. Now, a different kind of rhythm pulsed beneath the surface, a discordant hum of tension he couldn't ignore. His initial reaction had been a flicker of annoyance. After all the work, all the effort to create an inclusive, welcoming space, to hear it dismissed so flippantly, but annoyance was a fleeting luxury. Something colder, harder, was settling in its place. It wasn't just about him, about his vision. It was about the subtle shift in Erica's demeanor he'd witnessed when the two boys approached the counter. The forced brightness of her smile, the almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders as she processed their order. It was a familiar dance, one Malik knew all too well from his own younger days, the careful navigation of prejudice, the constant awareness of being judged before being seen. He watched as Erica moved through the restaurant, a whirlwind of forced cheerfulness. Her interactions with customers seemed to follow a pattern. With some, there was an ease, a genuine warmth in her voice. With others, a subtle stiffness, a barely perceptible distance. He traced her path, her gaze, the subtle cues in her body language. The older couple in the corner booth, their order taken with meticulous care. The young Hispanic family, their questions answered with a hurried efficiency that bordered on curtness. The pattern repeated itself, a subtle but undeniable choreography of bias. He sipped his iced tea, the sweetness failing to mask the bitter taste in his mouth. He thought of the countless hours he'd poured into building Soulfire Grill, not just as a business, but as an embodiment of his own beliefs. A place where everyone, regardless of background, could enjoy good food and good company. He'd envisioned a space where differences were celebrated, not tolerated, where community thrived, not just existed. Now that vision felt tarnished, cracked. The boy's words were just the symptom. The disease was something deeper, something festering beneath the surface of polite smiles and efficient service. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath, trying to sift through the swirling emotions. Disappointment warred with anger, concern with a growing sense of responsibility. He could walk away. He could chalk it up to a bad day, an isolated incident. He could maintain his anonymity, finish his meal, and return to the comfortable detachment of his corporate office. But the image of Erica's strained smile, the subtle flinch in her eyes, wouldn't leave him. He knew that look. He'd warned himself. He opened his eyes, the restaurant coming back into focus. The clatter of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, the rhythmic sizzle of the grill, all the familiar sounds now laced with a new, unsettling undercurrent. He realized then that his purpose here had shifted. This wasn't about a casual meal, about experiencing his restaurant as a customer. This was about something more. Because this wasn't about hurt feelings. This wasn't about pride. This was about truth. The words formed in his mind, clear and resolute. The truth was that something was broken here, in this branch, in this microcosm of his carefully constructed world. And he, Malik Jefferson, the founder, the visionary, the man behind the brand, couldn't ignore it. He wouldn't ignore it. He pushed his plate away, the half-eaten ribs a testament to his lost appetite. He had a different kind of hunger now, a hunger for answers, for understanding. He needed to know what was happening here, beneath the surface of smiles and sizzling meat. He needed to talk to Erica, to Tavon, to anyone who could shed light on this unsettling shift in the atmosphere. He needed to understand how his vision had become so distorted, so broken. He caught Erica's eye across the room, a flicker of recognition, of something else he couldn't quite decipher in her gaze. He gave a slight nod, a silent promise, a signal that he was no longer just a customer. He was here to fix what was broken. He was here to reclaim the truth. The ice machine groaned, a low, mechanical sigh that blended with the hum of conversation and the sizzle of the grill. Malik watched as the young employee, name tag reading Tavon, struggled with the cumbersome ice scoop, his brow furrowed in concentration. He hadn't intended to engage any of the staff, preferring to remain an anonymous observer. Yet, there was a weariness in the young man's posture, a tightness around his eyes that mirrored the tension Malik had sensed simmering beneath the surface of the seemingly cheerful restaurant. He felt a familiar tug of empathy, a phantom echo of the countless times he himself had wrestled with cumbersome equipment and heavier burdens in the early days of Soulfire. "Seems like y'all been a little short-handed today," Malik commented, his voice casual, hoping to sound like nothing more than a curious customer. He fidgeted with the straw in his half-empty iced tea, a nervous habit he thought he'd long outgrown. Inside, a small, anxious voice whispered, "What if he recognizes you? What if this blows your cover?" He pushed the thought aside, reminding himself of the importance of understanding the reality of his Hendersonville branch. Tavon straightened up, the ice scoop momentarily forgotten. He looked around, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes before they settled on Malik. "Yeah, a little bit," he admitted, his voice low. "Flu season's hit us hard," and a couple folks called out. He shrugged, resuming his struggle with the ice, the rhythmic clinking a counterpoint to the rising anxiety in Malik's chest. Malik leaned against the counter, feigning casual interest. He observed Tavon closely, noting the way his jaw clenched, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. This wasn't just about the flu, Malik sensed. There was something else weighing on the young man. "New manager seems to be keeping things running smoothly, though," Malik ventured, the words carefully chosen, a fishing line cast into the murky waters of the restaurant's internal dynamics. He held his breath, waiting for the telltale ripple of truth. Tavon's response was hesitant, a carefully constructed facade of neutrality. "She cool, but some folks don't like the way she runs stuff." He glanced over his shoulder, a nervous tick before continuing. "She real strict. Keeps on us about everything, even the small stuff." He scooped a final mound of ice, letting it clatter into a waiting pitcher. "Some of the older workers, they think she's trying to change too much." He hesitated, his eyes meeting Malik's for a fleeting moment before darting away. "Some folks think she only looks out for the ones that look like her." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Malik felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a familiar refrain, a melody of prejudice he'd heard countless times throughout his own life, echoing from childhood playgrounds to corporate boardrooms. He'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that Soulfire, his creation, his legacy, would be different. That he'd build a space where such sentiments wouldn't take root, where everyone would feel valued, seen, and respected. The reality, it seemed, was far more complex. He looked at Tavon, seeing not just an employee, but a reflection of his younger self, navigating the treacherous currents of a world often tilted against him. He remembered the sting of being overlooked, the frustration of having his voice drowned out by those who held the reins of power. He remembered the burning desire to prove them wrong, to build something of his own, something better. And had he failed? The question pierced through the carefully constructed walls of his composure. Had his dream, his vision of an inclusive and equitable workplace, devolved into the very thing he had sought to escape? He took a deep breath, the cool air doing little to quell the fire that had begun to burn in his chest. He knew he couldn't remain a passive observer any longer. This wasn't just about a few disgruntled employees or a temporary dip in customer satisfaction. This was about the soul of his company, the very essence of what he believed in. He straightened, a newfound resolve solidifying his stance. He looked at Tavon, his gaze steady, his voice unwavering. "Thanks for your honesty," he said, a genuine warmth now coloring his tone. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience, of unspoken understanding. He turned to leave, the ice machine's groan fading into the background as a new sound emerged, the quiet hum of a plan taking shape, the whisper of a leader reawakened. The muted clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation from the dining area faded as Malik walked down the narrow hallway. The air, thick with the mingled scents of grilling meat and antiseptic cleaner, pressed in on him, a palpable change from the lively atmosphere of the restaurant floor. He hadn't intended to eavesdrop. It was the raised voices, a discordant note in the otherwise smooth rhythm of the restaurant, that snagged his attention. He paused outside the partially open door to the manager's office, a knot tightening in his stomach. He recognized the strained pitch of Erica Russell's voice. "I've told you 3 times if the food isn't hot, don't send it out." The words were clipped, tight with frustration. Malik could almost feel the tension radiating from the other side of the door. He hesitated, an internal debate warring within him. Was this crossing a line? He was here as an observer, a customer, not an investigator. But the raw emotion in Erica's voice, the tremor of something close to desperation, held him rooted to the spot. "It's not about the food, Erica. It's the way you talk to people," a gruff, older voice replied. Malik strained to place it, sifting through the mental roster of employees he'd met during his last official visit. The voice held a weariness, a resignation that pricked at Malik's conscience. He knew the pressure Erica was under, the weight of corporate expectations pressing down on her young shoulders. He'd seen that same weariness in the eyes of other managers, a slow erosion of enthusiasm under the relentless demands of the job. He wondered if he, in his pursuit of expansion and efficiency, had inadvertently created a system that crushed the very spirit he'd hoped to cultivate. "You act like we're kids," the man continued, his voice rising slightly. The words echoed in the confined space of the hallway, each syllable a small explosion of resentment. Malik closed his eyes briefly, picturing the man older, probably a veteran of the restaurant industry, used to a different style of management. He could almost feel the sting of being treated like a novice, the unspoken dismissal of years of experience. Erica's response was sharp, edged with fatigue. Maybe that's a problem. A beat of silence hung in the air, heavy and charged, before she continued, her voice barely a whisper. You care too much. The words, seemingly simple, struck Malik with the force of a physical blow. He leaned against the wall, the hallway suddenly feeling too small, the air too thick to breathe. You care too much. It wasn't an accusation, not exactly. It was a lament, a confession of a burden too heavy to bear. He pictured Erica, barely 30, her face etched with the strain of long hours and mounting pressure. He remembered her initial enthusiasm, the bright spark of ambition in her eyes when she first joined Soulfire Grill. Had he, in his drive for success, extinguished that flame? He'd built Soulfire Grill on the principles of inclusivity and respect, a place where everyone felt valued, both employees and customers. But had those principles become just empty slogans, plastered on posters and recited in training sessions, while the reality on the ground was something far different? He thought of Tavon, the young busboy, his quiet observations about the vibe of the restaurant. Had Tavon sensed this underlying tension, this simmering resentment? Malik realized he'd been so focused on the external perception of Soulfire Grill, the customer experience, the bottom line, that he'd failed to see the cracks forming within the foundation. He'd been so preoccupied with building an empire that he'd forgotten the people who held it together, the individuals whose lives and livelihoods were intertwined with his vision. The man's voice, low and rumbling, broke through Malik's thoughts. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was conciliatory, laced with a weary understanding. Erica's reply was muffled, lost in the sudden rush of guilt that flooded Malik's chest. He pushed himself away from the wall, the weight of his responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't remain a passive observer any longer. He had to act, not as Malik Jefferson, the CEO, but as a leader who recognized the human cost of his ambition. He straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The scene that unfolded before him was etched into his memory. Erica, slumped in her chair, her face pale and drawn, and the older man, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that spoke volumes about the unspoken bond between them. The air was thick with unspoken words, with a weight of shared burdens and unspoken fears. Malik knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had a lot of work to do, not just to repair the cracks in his restaurant, but to rebuild the trust he'd unknowingly eroded. He stepped into the room, the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders, but a flicker of hope, a nascent resolve, beginning to ignite within him. The rhythmic clatter of cutlery against ceramic, the sizzle of seasoned meat hitting the grill, the murmur of conversations all blended into the familiar symphony of a busy Soulfire Grill. Malik leaned back against the cool, faux brick wall near the counter, sipping his iced tea. He watched Erica Russell, the Hendersonville branch manager, navigate the lunchtime rush. Her movements were brisk, efficient, but there was a tightness in her shoulders, a flicker of exhaustion in her eyes that hadn't been there during her interview. He felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't the energetic, passionate manager he'd handpicked. A man in a rumpled business suit approached the counter, his expression sour. He slammed his receipt down, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the suddenly hushed space near the register. Malik watched Erica tense, her hand instinctively reaching up to smooth her already impeccably tied scarf. He'd seen that gesture before. It was the subtle tell of someone bracing for impact. I've been coming to Soulfire for years, the man began, his voice tight with displeasure. But lately, well, it's just not the same. Malik's unease intensified. He recognized the tone, the coded language. He'd heard it whispered in online reviews, seen it veiled in carefully worded customer feedback surveys. Erica's voice was calm, professional. Is there something specific I can help you with, sir? Malik saw the subtle tremor in her hand as she reached for the receipt. Inside, he knew she was already battling fatigue, the weight of unseen pressures bearing down on her. He wondered if she'd confided in anyone, if she even felt she could. It's this whole atmosphere, the man continued, gesturing vaguely around the restaurant. It's become so political. Malik felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He knew exactly what the man meant. The subtle shift in decor, the inclusive posters, the diverse staff, all part of his conscious effort to create a welcoming environment for everyone. He'd poured his heart and soul into building Soulfire Grill, brick by brick, on the foundation of respect and inclusivity. He never imagined it would become a source of contention. Erica's face was carefully neutral. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." Her internal monologue, Malik imagined, was a whirlwind of anxieties. Was this about the pride flag sticker on the door? The Black Lives Matter sign in the window? The new hiring policy? Each possibility a potential landmine. "You know what I mean?" the man insisted, his voice rising. "It's not like it used to be. It used to be normal." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken prejudice. Malik felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea, the ice clinking against the glass, the sound strangely loud in the sudden hush. He was just a customer, an observer. He should stay silent, gather his data, and address the issue later. But something inside him snapped. He couldn't stand by and listen to this thinly veiled bigotry. "Excuse me," Malik said, his voice quiet but firm. He stepped forward, placing his glass on the counter. The man turned, his face a mask of annoyance. "Yes, my name is Malik Jefferson," Malik said, meeting the man's gaze directly. "I'm the founder and CEO of Soulfire Grill." The man's eyes widened, his face paling slightly. The color drained from his cheeks, replaced by a mottled flush of embarrassment. Erica's breath hitched, her eyes fixed on Malik, a mixture of shock and something akin to relief flickering in their depths. She probably thought she was about to be reprimanded. He realized. Malik continued, his voice steady. "This place is built on one thing: respect. Respect for our employees, respect for our customers, respect for everyone who walks through these doors. We welcome everyone, regardless of their race, religion, sexual orientation, or anything else that makes them who they are." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the food's not the problem." The man stammered, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. He looked around, as if seeking an escape route. The other customers, who had been subtly observing the exchange, now averted their gazes, pretending to be engrossed in their meals. The air crackled with tension. "Tudin, the man began, his voice weak. Malik held up a hand. "I understand what you meant," he said, his voice still calm but laced with steel. "And I want to be clear. This is not a political statement. It's a human statement. It's about treating everyone with dignity and respect." The man mumbled something unintelligible and retreated, practically fleeing the restaurant. Malik watched him go, the anger slowly receding, replaced by a weary resignation. He turned to Erica, who was still standing frozen, her eyes wide. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Erica, can we talk in her office?" She nodded, her throat working as she swallowed. The silence in the restaurant was thick, heavy. Malik felt the weight of all the unseen struggles, the unspoken anxieties, the silent battles fought within these walls. He had come here incognito, seeking to understand. He had found more than he bargained for. The stale air of the small office, tinged with a lingering scent of frying oil and disinfectant, pressed down on Erica. She sat stiffly in the hard plastic chair, the rhythmic drumming of her fingers against the cheap laminate desktop a counterpoint to the unsettling quiet that had fallen over the room. Malik Jefferson, the man whose face graced every Soulfire Grill poster, sat opposite her, his expression unreadable. He'd shed the pretense of being a regular customer, the casual clothes replaced by a crisp, dark suit that seemed to amplify his presence, turning the cramped space into a pressure cooker. Erica swallowed, the dryness in her throat a physical manifestation of her anxiety. She'd spent the last hour replaying every decision she'd made since taking over this branch, each one now cast in the harsh light of this unexpected audit. Had she been too lenient? Too strict? The uncertainty gnawed at her. A soft knock broke the silence, followed by Tavon cautiously opening the door. He ushered in the rest of the afternoon staff, their faces a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Erica watched them file in, their familiar uniforms suddenly feeling like costumes in this strange, charged atmosphere. She knew the whispers had already started, the speculation about the mysterious corporate visitor and his extended stay in the back office. She could almost feel the weight of their collective gaze, each glance a silent question. Malik rose, his movements smooth and deliberate, and addressed the small group. His voice, usually booming with charismatic energy in the company videos, was subdued, almost gentle. "Thanks for coming in, everyone. I know this isn't how you planned to spend your afternoon." A ripple of nervous laughter, brittle and forced, went through the room. Erica saw Tavon shift his weight, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Malik's shoulder. He was the one who had spoken to Malik earlier, the one who had dared to voice the unspoken anxieties simmering beneath the surface of their carefully constructed workplace harmony. Erica felt a pang of something akin to gratitude, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. What would this mean for him? For her? What happened earlier, Malik continued, his gaze sweeping across the faces before him. That was on me. Erica's breath hitched. On him? How could he possibly take responsibility for the simmering resentment, the whispered complaints, the palpable tension that had been building for months? She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. He raised a hand, silencing her unspoken protest. "I built this brand to be about soul. Soul food, soul music, a place where everyone feels welcome, feels seen." He paused, his gaze lingering on Erica before moving on to the others. "What I'm seeing here today feels like folks are walking on eggshells, like you're afraid to breathe." His voice dropped, low and resonant, filling the small room. "That ain't soul. That's survival." A heavy silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Erica could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, the almost imperceptible sound of her own heart pounding against her ribs. Malik's words had pierced through the carefully constructed facade, laying bare the raw, uncomfortable truth. They were surviving. She was surviving. Each day was a tightrope walk, balancing the demands of corporate, the needs of her staff, and the expectations of a community grappling with change. Finally, Tavon spoke, his voice hesitant but clear. "It sits hard, Mr. Jefferson. You're not alone, any more weary, all afraid of saying the wrong thing." He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white against his dark skin. "We're trying, but..." His voice trailed off, the unspoken but hanging heavy in the air. Malik nodded, his expression softening. "I get it, Tavon. I get it. We're living in a time where everyone's got a camera, everyone's got an opinion. It's easy to get caught up in the noise, to lose sight of what really matters." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Respect. That's what matters. Respect for each other, respect for our customers, respect for the food we serve." He glanced at Erica, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Erica here, she's working hard to build that respect, to create a space where everyone feels valued. And she needs our help to do it. Erica felt a surge of something complex: relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't blaming her. He was acknowledging the challenge, the shared responsibility. She looked around the room, seeing the tension in her staff begin to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. One of the older cooks, Mrs. Johnson, spoke up, her voice laced with weariness. "This place, it's more than just a paycheck, Mr. Jefferson. It's family. And families, well, families have their disagreements." A murmur of agreement went through the room. Malik smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Exactly, Mrs. Johnson. And families talk things out. They support each other. They grow together." He straightened up, his voice regaining some of its usual energy. "So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start having regular staff meetings, a space where we can talk openly and honestly about what's working and what's not. We're going to bring in some diversity and inclusion training, not just for the staff, but for management too. He paused, his gaze meeting Erica's. Erica, you're not alone anymore. I'm here to support you. We're all here to support each other. We're going to get through this together. A wave of relief washed over Erica, loosening the knot of tension that had been tightening in her chest for months. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild, to reconnect, to rediscover the soul of Soulfire Grill. As the meeting drew to a close, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny ember glowing in the darkness. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could find their way back to the heart of what truly mattered. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, painting the asphalt with a warm, fading glow. Malik watched Erica Russell walk towards him, her shoulders slightly slumped, her gait weary. A familiar pang of guilt resonated within him. He'd built this empire of spice and flame, but at what cost? He'd been so focused on the expansion, on the numbers, he'd failed to see the cracks forming in the foundation, the strain on the very people who held it all together. "Everything all right, Mr. David?" Erica asked, her voice laced with a professional politeness that felt brittle, almost fragile. He admired her resilience, the way she held herself despite the evident exhaustion etched on her face. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Call me Malik. And yes, thank you for asking. I just wanted to say thank you for your time today, Erica, and for your honesty." The words felt inadequate, hollow against the weight of the burden he knew she carried. He'd seen it in the tightness of her jaw, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes when he'd pressed her about the staff morale. He'd peeled back the layers of forced optimism, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. It's been a challenging few months," she admitted, the carefully constructed facade finally cracking. A sigh escaped her lips, a whisper of weariness. "I'm trying my best, Malik," but her voice trailed off, the unspoken anxieties hanging heavy in the air. "I know you are," he said, his voice soft yet firm, "and I appreciate it. More than you know." He paused, searching for the right words, the words that could bridge the chasm between his position and hers, between the vision and the reality. "I miss the early days," he confessed, a wistful note creeping into his voice, when it was just a handful of people who believed. He remembered the camaraderie, the shared sense of purpose that had fueled their initial success. Somewhere along the way, that spark had dimmed, replaced by the cold efficiency of corporate structure. Erica's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise in their depths. She'd probably expected a corporate platitude, a pat on the back, and a reminder of quarterly targets. Not this raw honesty, this glimpse into the man behind the brand. "Two can imagine," she murmured, her voice laced with a newfound understanding. "I'm glad you didn't hear those comments earlier," he said, referring to the teenage boys' conversation he'd overheard. He could still hear their dismissive words echoing in his mind, a stark reminder of the challenges they faced. "Would have made your day even longer." A faint smile touched her lips. "You heard that, huh?" The question wasn't accusatory, merely an acknowledgement of his keen observation skills. He nodded, his gaze holding hers. "No, you're not the problem, Erica," he said, his voice low and earnest. He saw a flicker of something akin to relief wash over her face. "But you're carrying problems that weren't built by you, and that's not fair." He knew she was bearing the brunt of the growing pains, the inevitable friction that came with change. He saw a wave of emotion wash over her face, relief, gratitude, and perhaps a sliver of hope. He knew she was carrying the weight of the restaurant's struggles, the silent anxieties of a leader trying to navigate uncertain waters. He wanted her to know that he saw her, he acknowledged her efforts, and he wouldn't let her drown. "We rebuild, Erica," he stated, his voice gaining strength. "The right way." As Erica headed back inside, Malik turned his attention to the two teenage boys lingering near their car. He approached them, a quiet confidence in his stride. They looked up, startled, their youthful bravado momentarily faltering. He recognized the flicker of defensiveness in their eyes, the subtle shift in their posture. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation earlier," he began, his voice calm and even. He saw them exchange a nervous glance. "I'm Malik. I own this place." He waited, letting the information sink in. He didn't want to lecture. He wanted to understand. Their eyes widened in surprise, their earlier arrogance melting away, replaced by a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He didn't push, didn't interrupt the silence that hung heavy between them. He gave them the space to process, to reflect. Finally, one of them, the taller one with a mop of unruly brown hair, spoke. We didn't mean any disrespect, sir." The words were hesitant, laced with a newfound respect. Malik nodded, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. "I know, but sometimes, even unintentional words can have an impact." He paused, his gaze sweeping over them. "We stop pretending everything's fine. We listen more. We treat our values like non-negotiables because they are." His voice grew stronger, resonating with a quiet authority. "And if anyone inside these walls thinks inclusion is some PR stunt, they can go work somewhere else." He let the words hang in the air, allowing their weight to settle upon the young men. He looked them in the eye, conveying a message that went beyond the words themselves. It was about understanding, about empathy, about the ripple effect of their actions and choices. He saw a flicker of understanding in their eyes, a dawning realization of a larger context. He wasn't just talking about his restaurant. He was talking about the world they lived in. He turned to leave, pausing at the edge of the parking lot. He looked back at the restaurant, at the warm glow emanating from within, a beacon against the encroaching twilight. He took a deep breath, the scent of grilling spices filling his lungs. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He had Erica, he had Tavon, and he had countless others who believed in the same vision. He looked out at the streetlights flickering to life, the cars streaming past, each carrying its own story, its own hopes and dreams. He thought about the power of connection, the importance of listening, the responsibility that came with leadership. He murmured the words to himself, a quiet affirmation of his renewed purpose. Leadership isn't about being seen. It's about seeing and doing, even when no one knows your name.